What I don't get is why everyone tells us alcohol is bad, but then all the commercials on TV show people drinking beer and having fun.
Mom?
No, you got it.
Well, because, son, see, alcohol in appropriate quantities is not necessarily bad. You just can't do it till you're 21.
So alcohol is good for adults and bad for kids?
Oh, it's bad for kids. It's not good for adults. It's an option. It's bad for kids. It's definitely bad for kids. It's bad for kids. It's not good for adults, but it's an option for adults.
So if it's not good for adults, then why do they do it?
Eat your dinner, Cam.
Okay.
And that was some footage from season 1 of Awkward Conversations. And as you can see, sometimes these conversations don't go as planned. So one of the goals that we have on this show is to really help parents and give you resources, tools, and ways to have the talk. And the thing is the talk isn't one talk. It's lots of little talks. It's all throughout them growing up. And it's making sure that you have that bond and that relationship with your kids. And, today I'm really excited to have some special guests with us. We have Robert Vincent, who is the Associate Administrator for Alcohol Prevention and Treatment Policy at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which we call SAMHSA sometimes. Rob, thank you so much for coming and welcome to the show.
My pleasure, and thank you, Jodie.
Absolutely. And we also have Dr. Aida Balsano, who is Special Assistant to the Director at the Center for Substance Abuse Prevention, SAMHSA. Thank you, Dr. Balsano, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for having us with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have Amy McCarthy, who is our LCSW clinical social worker out of Boston Children's Hospital. Today's episode is all about the talk, the big thing, the big awkward conversation, and how we approach it and how we start. I'd love to hear from Rob and Dr. Balsano about, when should we start addressing drugs with kids? It's something that now with social media, with television, all that, kids see and know a lot more about the world just by nature of being exposed to it. So when do we start having these conversations about drugs and about substances that they might be seeing?
Well, I think from my perspective, Jodie, really as early as 9, the real goal here is to have lots of small conversations, as you had said earlier, throughout the course of the lifespan, really. But, when we think about young people and how to protect them and give them the best chance to thrive, the easiest way to do that is to build a lasting, loving relationship that's open and that you can have good conversations. And so we often will I refer to it as 61-minute conversations, but it's really a lot more than 60. We encourage you to do more. The earlier you start is better, but those conversations will be different as a child grows. So developmentally, those conversations will start to shape and morph a bit.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about it's not one 60-minute conversation, but you think of it more as 61-minute conversations. This is not one time that you're going to sit down with your kids, explain things, and then, well, that's it. Thanks so much. And I'll, check in with you at 18 about this. This is, talking about it. Oh, what do you think about that? Are your friends experiencing this? What is going on at school? And sometimes if kids are coming from maybe a divorced household, what's going on, at the other house? Having these conversations so that kids feel that they can come to their parent without shame, without punishment, but really having that open dialogue.
Agree with what Rob just said. I think we often think of these situations as tasks that we are trying to conquer, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves as parents to do it well, to do it right, whatever right means for us, for that particular situation. But if we think about it as an opportunity, all of us want the best for our kids, and we want to set them on a path of successful, healthy lives. And so, as it was said, 60 conversations, each 1 minute. There doesn't have to be any special setup for the conversation. There doesn't have to be, a special place. sometimes things just occur when you're not prepared, and that's okay. But just being curious. I think, in those conversations, just pure curiosity about the context that your child is in, I think can be helpful and kind of lead parent more smoothly through a conversation with the child that way, rather than thinking about it, oh, I got to talk about this, is this the right time? I'm not ready.
Right. And I love what you said, too, about, really asking questions. I'm wearing a shirt that says listen, because I think it's one of the most important things that parents can do. I know I do it sometimes, too. And my kids have said, like, can you please just not mom talk to me, like, about this? Can I just vent? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I get, as parents, we want to be like, and now we are going to talk. And, here's all of my wisdom and experience. And it feels, the minute you do that, the kids are like, oh boy, here we go. And they kind of tune out. It's really about, I find, and we've talked about this in other episodes, the driving back and forth to soccer practice, driving to school in the morning, dropping off at a friend's house, oh, what's going on your social media? What made you laugh? Asking questions to bring things out of your kid in a non-threatening, non-confrontational way, I think is such a helpful way to have these conversations, because particularly when kids are in that preteen, teenage era, the last thing they want is, the parental caretaker, like, we're going to sit down and have a serious conversation. So it's finding those little ways. And I love what you said, finding those ins and sort of how to have those conversations and really open it up further. And also listening to your kid and knowing when the conversation is done. I think sometimes parents want to continue to hammer a point, and I know, again, I do it and talk and talk and talk. And sometimes you have to go, wait, I think they checked out like 5 minutes ago. We're going to leave this and I'll come back to it a little bit later. And that's okay.
So that's a wonderful point, Jodie, that you're making about different situations and settings where we can talk with kids about these topics. We watch, for example, movies with our kids from when they're little. Some of us are more chatty during those movies, other parents less, but they do hear. They might not look at you, pay attention to exactly what you're saying, but every show that you watch with your kid where there is some talk about substance use or substances just being, presented on TV or a big screen, it's an opportunity to make a comment. But it's important not to comment in a judgmental way, but to comment about the appropriateness maybe of what a person is doing in that situation. And maybe just sometimes, asking a question, I wonder why they chose to do that rather than something else. And as you said, we do sometimes talk and they don't hear us anymore. So, my own kid, I'm a parent of a 13-year-old. And so she'll sometimes just say, it's like, I'm trying to, watch the show, right? But I'm not necessarily, as a parent, perhaps looking to reach her through that one exposure to one show. It's over time. It's 13 years of watching something together with her and asking, what do you think about this? And so if we think about it that way, it puts much less pressure on parents to cover these topics and to, get their children to hear what they have to say.
These are all good points. When we think about it, and what research really has shown us that 80% of kids really want to have these conversations, and it's shown to be one of the most effective ways that you can engage with your child. Context matters, presence matters. All of those things around engagement and your approachability in that conversation truly does matter.
Yeah, I think a lot about how, we say all the time, like, oh, they're not listening, they're not hearing us, like, they don't care. And then I also kind of compare that to, even me and my friends, or like, just, the adults in my life, and thinking about how often we say, oh man, like, my parents used to say this, or I wish I listened to my parents, like, kind of. And so when we think about that context of it, like, we actually know that we were listening as young people. And so, it's important not to dismiss that. They might not show that they're listening now, but it's getting in there, and they need to hear it, often. And again, like you said, Dr. Balsano, like, throughout their lifetime, because that's how we as humans learn, and that's how it sinks in.
Absolutely. I remember being young and my mom always telling me that her job was to instill her voice as like my conscience is like my Jiminy Cricket in my head, so that when I was out and I had the opportunity to make a good choice for myself or to make a bad choice for myself, I would hear that little voice. And she said, and over time, I want it to be your voice, not mom's voice, but your voice that you hear that says, that's not good for me. And, you know, as a kid, I was like, oh, this is so lame. Like, who wants my mom in my head? I don't want to hear her, you know. But I absolutely heard it. And I know now today, the voice that I hear when I go, oh, that's not a good idea, it comes from my mom setting that foundation and my parents setting that foundation and saying, like, this is good for you, this is not. And whether I listened at the time, you know, whatever choice I made, I eventually soaked that in. And I think we need to remember that like our kids are sponges and they're constantly taking it in and listening. And it doesn't have to just be, you know, we're talking about the talk. It's not the talk. You should always be talking. Now, we do know that one of the ways that you can intro this conversation is maybe making it a conversation about health, about well-being, because really the most important thing that we can do as parents is to delay that first start with substance use of any kind. If we can delay that as long as possible, it's been proven that kids and young adults will have a much better rate of success with not struggling with substance abuse. If we can delay that first age of use until a little bit later.
I can share one of the things that we can do is to focus more on talking about positive things that they can do in their life. We know that children in middle school and high school, especially at the beginning of middle school, they start exploring a lot of after-school activities. They're looking for where they can express themselves. What can they be part of? How do they spend, more time with particular, groups of friends that they might have? It's like, what are others doing? And there's this kind of like cacophony of activities, that they're trying on, and testing especially during the middle school. We as parents really need to be supportive of that and talking with them about the positive aspects of them engaging in these positive activities. If we put ourselves in their shoes and, you're hearing from your parent perhaps mostly about, don't do that, are you using something? Are you drinking? That comes across as constantly being like an expectation of you thinking your child might get into a trouble, right? Might do something negative. That's different than a child hearing from you, look, I think, you have capacity and you have ability to get involved in some positive things, to do well at school. And so, pushing those positive messages more and positive conversations. We don't think about them as talking about, abstaining from alcohol use or delaying, use. But actually it is that. It's just in a roundabout way. You're actually giving your child or that young person something else to focus on that's much more positive for them in the long term.
I think jumping, along with that, those positive conversations, like not only what can they be doing now that are positive outlets and supports, but, helping them envision their future and the positive things that can kind of come for them in the future. Because when they have that vision and they feel that they're on solid ground, then also they can also, make that connection sometimes that substances might really derail that again, vision that they may have. And then I also think helping them with their sense of belonging. Isolation is one of the biggest contributors, and feeling isolated is one of the biggest contributors to onset of use in the first place. And so helping them find kind of, and when I say isolation, we know that you don't have to be actually alone to feel alone. And so sometimes like even kids surrounded with big groups of friends, do feel kind of, on their own. And so, building their self-worth, building their self-esteem, helping kind of connect and ground them to the people in their lives and the communities that surround them. And of course, their family of origin, most importantly.
I would jump in here just to add a little color to it. If you think developmentally and all of those big transitions that go on in life, and to your point, Jodie, around, if you will, as your brain develops, right? I mean, we know pretty clear today, it's around 25, 26 before executive functioning really sort of sets in. And that's what we sometimes refer to as the go, no-go function, right? It's that thing that goes, oh, that might not be in my best interest to do. And so, the important piece of that, in my view, is from those developmental stages as you're going through key transitions. And I always think of 8th grade as one of the key ones, right? Where you're sort of big man on campus, and then you go to 9th grade and all of a sudden it's a whole different realm, right? And you're trying to fit in, and you're trying to try on, as Aida said, those new behaviors. I'm trying to find who I am. What am I about? And those are the vulnerable times, because the one thing that rings true with the substance using crowd is they're oftentimes the most accepting crowd. They'll take everybody in unequivocally and embrace them just the way they are. And if you're a person who's feeling a little lost or disenfranchised in some way, that's a great group to be involved in. Why? Because they validate me. And then all of a sudden you find yourself on a slippery slope. And that's the importance of all of these conversations, and that being present, as Amy, you had talked about earlier, and just being there and having multiple conversations throughout the period.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using counterfeit prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part. Take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Counterfeit prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
And really, what I've heard from all three of you is that approach is everything. When you sit down to have these conversations, sometimes a little more informal is better versus a very structured meeting. We're sitting down and going to face each other and talk about this. Have it in the car, have it, on the way somewhere, have it when you're sitting on the couch watching TV. To also have the information, I think, as parents, before we go into it, so that if we do get asked questions, we have some of that information. And also not being afraid to say, I don't know. Let me look into that. Like, that's actually a really good question. We don't have to make things up. We don't have to have all of the answers. And, sometimes I think it is nice for our kids to see us go, you know what? I don't know. Let me look into that, because it makes them feel more reassured that maybe sometimes you don't have to have all of the answers, but you can go look for them and you can ask questions, and this has to be kept an ongoing conversation and low key, again, talking about the informal versus the structured meeting. Like, you don't have to get everything across in one talk. And that's one of the things that I hear everyone keep reiterating in this is, it's building a relationship. It's building, that child's self-esteem. It's building their self-worth. And that comes across in all of the ways that you communicate with your kids, not just about substance use, but in all of the ways you communicate, building them up, not always looking for the negative. And it's hard because kids are constantly driving you crazy. I have 2 of them, 14 and almost 12, and it's a lot. But, constantly remembering, how can I reframe this in a way that either asks a question or builds them up or sets them up in a way that they have to critically think about this themselves, as opposed to you're wrong, you're bad, you made a stupid decision. All of that stuff, I think, just further pushes kids, like Amy was talking about, into that isolation and away from feeling connected to a trusted source of information, which could be their parent or caregiver.
You're absolutely right, Jodie. Approach matters, and mostly it's about demonstrating and showing that you care. And saving the really intense structured conversations for a time when it's really important, when there's real concern. But more importantly, I think every child really does want you to help them grow and be successful. But the way you go about that largely is the expression of, I love and I care for you, and I only want the best for you. And if you're doing these things, if you hear concern in my voice, it's because I want you to make the best decisions for you and be the best person you can be for you. And sometimes it's when a parent is fearful that their child is maybe in a harmful way. Sometimes what comes out is that attempt to control. And sometimes that shuts the conversation down pretty quickly, which is unfortunate, which means you get to have that truly awkward conversation of going, I know maybe that wasn't my best moment. And trying to reframe the conversation and see where you can pick up from there.
Now, of course, we started the show with some clips from season 1 where David's character really screwed up the conversation kind of at every point and just felt a little bit overwhelmed, I'm sure, as a lot of parents do. it's okay to be anxious, but what are some of the ways and strategies that parents can handle things if maybe they started the conversation and they did screw it up, or they started the conversation in a really punitive, angry way? How can they kind of go back and fix it and open up that door of communication a little more?
One thing that we can do as parents and as adults is to take a second or two to reflect on why we get anxious, why we get nervous about the topic. It could be as simple as we just don't think that we know enough about the topic to talk about it in some informed way with our own child, right? So that reflection and acceptance of our own kind of vulnerability when it comes to these topics. And perhaps, as parents, we might feel inadequate. And those are all valid feelings, the same way that we would want to validate in our, children's, their feelings, the feelings that they have. We need to do that towards ourselves and be more forgiving towards ourselves. And so that's, I would say, we start with that. And then not shying away from being vulnerable in front of your own child when you're talking about it. Jodie, you mentioned earlier about, hey, let's find out information that we don't know. Sometimes really it does take, both parent and the child to look into something, and information changes also over time. And so understanding that you're not expected to know everything. Some of us are in this field, have been in this field for years. Some of us have, backgrounds in human development, and we still find ourselves in situations where we go, oops, that wasn't my best moment, right? So everybody has good and not so good moments, but just taking a pause. And I would say as well, in moments like that, it's okay to be quiet. We are worried in these conversations when there's quiet. We're not saying anything. The child is not saying anything. Perhaps both of us at that moment just need a little bit of time to just think, and that's okay.
Coming up on the next episode of Awkward Conversations.
And sometimes if I can just have that acknowledgement of, I don't think that went really well. Could we do a reset? Could we try this again? And maybe to your point, Aida, maybe it's a moment where we just take a break.
They start arguing with us rather than having a conversation with us. And we then in return argue back. Which is something, it's kind of like you don't really understand, or you don't realize as a parent that you're doing it until you're way in that argument with them, right? And then you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? And you're kind of trying to pedal back.
And I think also the idea of, not stigmatizing people who struggle with addiction. As someone who has been through that myself, I know one of the hardest things was, at first telling people, oh, I struggled with addiction.
And make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.